Today, I'm going to talk about the neuroscience of habit. Let's talk about what quietly shapes almost every area of our lives, our habits. How do habits form? These are not just surface habits like what time we wake up or whether we drink coffee, but the deeply embedded behavioral and emotional patterns that run on autopilot. Many of us assume that if we truly want to change, we simply will. We'll simply decide one day and change our behavior. But if that was true, sustainable change would be very easy. The reality is that change is neurologically demanding, and resistance to change is not a character flaw, it is biology, it is what we were designed to do. The human brain is optimized for efficiency, not for transformation. It is a metabolically expensive organ, which means it consumes a disproportionate amount of body's energy, even at rest. Because of this, the brain is constantly looking for ways to conserve energy. One of the primary ways it does is through automation. When we repeat a behavior enough times, control of that behavior shifts from prefrontal cortex, your executive brain, to the part of the brain responsible for conscious decision making and executive function to deeper structures like the basal ganglia, particularly the dorsal striatum. This is where habit circuits live. What starts as a deliberate choice becomes an automated loop. Cue, routine, reward. Over time, the loop becomes efficient. Efficiency feels easy. Efficiency feels familiar. And familiar feels safe. Safety is the key word here. The brain does not prioritize happiness or growth. It does not prioritize what is healthy living and what is not. It prioritizes survival and predictability. The amygdala, which is involved in threat detection and emotional resilience, becomes activated by uncertainty. When you attempt to alter a long-standing habit, you're disrupting a predictable neural pathway. To your limbic system, it can register as instability. This is why resistance or change often feels visceral. It is not laziness. It is your nervous system preferring predictability, predictable patterns over ambiguity and not knowing. There is also a cognitive component known as status quo bias. We love inertia. We do not like change. The psychological preference for maintaining current conditions. Behavioral economics consistently demonstrate that humans are more sensitive to potential losses than equivalent gains. Even if a new behavior promises improved health, improved relationships, or improved performance, the brain magnifies what might be lost. Comfort, identity, routine, social alignment. An example of loss aversion is that my brain thinks of time spent binging on Netflix with kids as family and bonding time. Getting up to exercise feels like a chore and losing on that time. Rationally, anyone would tell me that's not true, but mind plays those tricks. The loss that keeps us anchored to the familiar. Habits are not just behavioral, they're identity reinforcing also. Repeated actions strengthen neural networks that shape our sense of self. The default mode network, which is active during self-referential thinking, stabilizes around narratives we repeat internally. If someone says, "I'm not disciplined, I'm always overwhelmed, I'm always anxious," these narratives become reinforced. The behavior begins to shift. It can create cognitive dissonance. A psychological tension between the reality and the action. The brain again seeks familiarity, and the expansion of identity is not real to it. When we apply this to health behaviors like nutrition, movement, sleep, stress, we see why changes are so metabolically taxing. Early in the change process, the prefrontal cortex must exert deliberate control to override the automatic circuits. This requires attention, executive effort. The effort feels exhausting. Many people misinterpret that exhaustion as poor, that they cannot change. In reality, it is evidence that they are recruiting higher order cortical control in the part of their executive brain over already established subcortical or primitive pathways. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism that makes that change possible. Repeated activation of new behavior strengthens these synaptic connections through long-term potentiation. Over time, efficiency shifts. The new pathway becomes easier to access. The behavior requires less conscious effort, but during the early phase, discomfort is expected. That is where most people quit. There is also a predictive component to consider. The brain operates on predictive coding modes. It constantly generates expectations based on past experiences and attempts to minimize prediction error. When we behave in ways that diverge from our established patterns, prediction error requires recalibration. The recalibration requires energy, and the brain prefers to minimize the expenditure of energy. This is one reason we drift into repetition by default. Transformation requires deliberate interruption of predictive models. In this, dopamine also plays a crucial role. Contrary to popular belief, dopamine is not just a pleasure molecule, it encodes motivation and reward prediction. When a new behavior is consistently paired with meaningful reward, like intrinsic satisfaction, improved energy, alignment with values, the dopaminergic pathways begin to reinforce the new loop. Gradually, preference shifts, which once required a lot of work and discipline, start to begin to feel natural. Understanding this framework reframes the resistance. It helps you understand your brain. If you find yourself repeating patterns that no longer serve you, the solution is not self-criticism or shame. The shame activates the same stress circuitry and narrows the cognitive flexibility. Curiosity, on the other hand, compassion, reinforces the prefrontal engagement. And you talk about, what uncertainty am I avoiding? Then you reduce the threat to your brain. Human beings are creatures of habit. That's why habit is neurologically efficient. Inertia is not moral weakness. It is a default state that we like to be in. Growth requires intention, repeated deviation from the default, reinforcing, and the temporary instability needs to form the new neural circuits. You will not accidentally evolve. You will not automatically repeat. But if you want change, it has to be deliberate, consistent, compassionate. Small repeated behavioral change reshapes the neural architecture over time. That is the biology of transformation. In closing, your brain is not designed to keep you comfortable in the long term. It is designed to keep you safe and in the short term. And the work of growth is learning to distinguish between those two so that we can choose consciously and also choose healthy habits, and how understand that discomfort initially is normal and how we can reshape our habits for a better health in the future. Thank you.